Good evening, everyone. We are now in Deuteronomy Chapter 4. Just by way of recap from our previous chapter, is that the beginning of possessing the promised land, the land that God was going to give to the nation of Israel, started in chapter 2, towards the end of chapter 2, where they came to the land of the Amorites, the king called Sihon, and God said, I will give you that land. And they possessed that land. And yesterday they went up north, further up, to the land of Bashan, where there was a king by the name of Og. And thereby they also took that land. Now, the very interesting observation that you would see is that these two are formidable locations where they are fortified cities, they are valiant armies, and yet the children of Israel won the war against these people and took them all out of the land, and they took over that land. Now, understand this, that the land that they passed through, that was the first one was in Edom. And God said that wasn't the land that you can have, because that land was given to the Edomites, the children or descendants of Esau. And they took over the land from the Horites. And then they went further north and it came to the land of the Moabites. The Moabites took that land from the Rephaims called the Emim. And then they went further up and they came to the land of Ammon. And God said, that's also not the land. God gave that land to the Ammonites. And the Ammonites took over that land from the Zamzumim. But right after that, it was the Amorites and the Bashan area. And that after they saw the power of God who went before them and fought for them. And so in that sense, it was an expression that God gave them an incredible ability to gain victory over enemies who were far stronger, far greater than them. Now, right after that, there was the allocation of the land. So from the north down, you have half the tribe of Manasseh. And they took the land of Bashan and the northern part of Gilead. And now the southern part of Gilead was given to two tribes, Reuben and Gad. And that was where we ended. Now, after that, we saw a very important, interesting element that Moses pleaded again that he wanted to cross the Jordan to see the land. And God says, don't want to talk about it. But if you want to see, brought him up to the top part of Pisgah. And we saw that part was called Mount Nebo in Deuteronomy chapter 34. And he saw the entire promised land right from the north to the south, from the east and to the west, from that peak. And thereby Moses began to understand the power of God, the awesomeness of God. Now, why was this narrative given? Was that chapter 4 comes after chapter 3, because the children of Israel would be the second and third generation, the ones that came out of Egypt that were 20 years and younger. They were not numbered among the army. And then those who were born in the wilderness are now this generation of Israel. And hence, this was a recap to remind them what were the failures in the desert. And in chapter 4, explains to them, now that God has given you this part, the eastern part of the Jordan, as an inheritance. Chapter 4, verse 1 says, and now Now, after all these things have happened, now in this phase of it, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live, go in, possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers is giving you. We need to spend some time on chapter 4, and hence chapter 4 being a very long chapter, we will end at verse 22 today, and we will carry on Monday. So the first things first, how do we unpack chapter 4, verse 1? The word listen literally means to hear. Now, we've seen this word before in the prophet books. Hear is a very common word and very well-used word in the Hebrew Old Testament. It is very much like a parent telling the children, listen to me, I'm telling you, go pick up your toys. So that's the same perspective of hearing. The children has to listen to the parents. So we use the word listen in the English, but in actual fact, the word hear encompasses the picking up of the sounds, the processing of the words that's heard, and to make decisions on what to do with that and to do it. And so sometimes the word hear or in the Hebrew is shama, and sometimes the translators use the word obey, sometimes to hear, sometimes to listen, but it's the same word. The idea here is to listen to what God has to say and do it. And so what does God have to say? He says here, statutes, which we translate as statutes, but this really means ordinance. Ordinances or limits. Now let me use this word. The word limits is actually a good word to use. Listen to the limits where if you have a garden and it's fenced up, and so then you can see the fences, whether it's bushes or link fences, that would be your limit. So statutes or ordinances really gives you the boundary of the freedom that you can execute. However, if you happen to exceed the boundary, there are judgments. Now, judgments are what we call decisions, right? Decisions or justice. And when would it come in would be if you exceed or do not comply to the ordinances or the limits, then there are consequences, and the consequences are called judgments. They're not the same, which I will teach you. The base word of teach is to learn, by the way. But in this case, in the more intensive form, it is to teach. And so the Hebrew word is very amazing. The base word, the root word is to learn, but the intense form is to teach, because you have to learn before you can teach. And this is to learn by way of goading. You know, good old days in an Oriental family, maybe a Chinese family, one of the ways of teaching is by the cane. Now, the cane could be by the very sight of the cane, or by what the cane brings as memory, or what the cane can potentially bring pain, or the cane was actually used. Now, in the old days, ancient days, where they're doing plowing, they would teach the oxen to walk the straight line. Otherwise, if the oxen moves all over the place, you can't really plow a straight line. So they have a stick to prod the ox, and that is to teach. And so this is a very Oriental expression. I will teach you. Teach you what? To observe, Now, unfortunately, our English word to observe seems to imply that we will just learn to look at it, right? Learn to look at it, but actually doesn't mean that. The idea here is to teach you all these things. Now, teach to observe is actually one word. So this word observe is not a separate Hebrew word. So the translator, I guess, decides to give you an expanded version, right? An expanded version. That this particular word is expanded. Now, the next word is that you may live. The word live here literally means to stay alive, right? To stay alive, to remain alive, to, how should you say, to live in that land, and it all revolves around the idea of being alive, to enjoy the place, right? And to go in. Well, go in is a very action-oriented. You must move, right? You must walk, and you must move from one point to another. So living, going in, possessing. Possessing is also to dispossess. The idea of possessing here really means to go in and occupy, to win over. If you win over, somebody's going to lose it out. So win over the land. And I want us to remember, whenever we talk about the word earth, it always refers to land. So I would suggest for now that we ignore the word earth whenever we read it in English and substitute it with the word land, because it's always about the land when we speak about the Israelites and the promised land, not the promised earth. Now, in the old days, I will submit to you that the word earth is used in a more limited sense. Today, in our modern 21st century, when we talk about earth, we're talking about the spatial expanse, which is the globe, right? The third rock from the sun. So we think of the earth more as looking at the earth from the outer space. But in the old days, the English word earth literally means a more narrow view, right? Which is land, which who gave? The Lord God of your fathers. Because this was a land that Moses keeps reminding them, God promised it to who? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it stops there. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And from Jacob, you get the 12 tribes. And so it comes in this triad because it is a very good way to remind them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they will always remember them as your fathers. And God is giving, allowing them to occupy. Now, I had earlier on when we began, we spoke about the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. God already gave the land to the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites a lot earlier, way earlier than now. And so God says you're not supposed to take over their land because they are also your brethren, your relatives. Edomite, the brother of Jacob, that's Esau. Moab as well as Ammon, the children of Lot, the nephew of Abraham. And so they are all related. So God says, God has given those land to them. Don't take. Now, there's one other person that we never see very much anymore after the book of Genesis is the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites are way over past the northern side of the Arabian Peninsula, which the Israelites no longer walk pass their land. So that was not disturbed at all. Now, verse 2 is a very important verse. Let me use a different color. When we talk about statutes and judgments, verse 2 says, "You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you." Let's break this down because we may not get the nuance very much from the English. The first word is add. You shall not cause to do more. Right? You shall not cause to increase. And obviously, the second contrast is the other word, take from it. And the word take from it literally means to clip, to diminish, or to do away, right? Or to, let's say, what else can we do? We say about this, to lessen. Now, these are two contrasting words which we need to expand. First of all, it is an action on the word. Now, the word is very familiar to us by now. The word is davar, right? The word is davar, which in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 1, davarim, davar. And the reason why we are familiar is because it repeats itself so many times in the book of Micah, Amos, Haggai, Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah. It always comes as the word of the Lord, the word of the Lord. And this is the word. And whenever it talks about the word, it's not just one word. It means the matters, the issues, the things that I'm going to tell you. These are things that matters. It is not just empty words that you can just one ear come in and one ear go out, or we can ignore. So whenever we talk about davar, which I command you, and the word command is very important. The command is actually a very simple word. It's like a parent telling the child, pick up your toys. That's a command. We don't need to look at commands as something like an army general telling the soldiers. I don't think we need to think of it that way. It is like a familial instruction. The parent telling the child, pick up your toys, and that's a command. And when you tell your children to pick up your toys, what do you think? What goes on in your mind? Do you allow your child to choose it as an option, whether they can choose not to do it, and whether to comply or not to comply? You don't. Will you allow your child to say, well, can I just pick up half my toys, right? It's not a big deal. I can leave the rest because I'm going to play with it tomorrow. Well, your command of picking up your toys is very complete. It's good for them, and you expect them to comply. And so the idea of add to it means that they are not, your children are not to do more than that. So he says, pick up your toys doesn't mean pick up your toys, pick up your dog, pick up the newspapers, pick up the glass that's broken on the ground. All you said was pick up the toys, and that's all you want them to do. Be very clear. Do not expand. And so pick up your toys doesn't mean play with it a little longer and then only you put it back into the basket. See, all of this means you do not add, you don't modify, you don't do more than what you're told. You are not to increase or expand the scope of the word. And if God tells us the gravity of the issue is such, let's say, if the gravity of an issue is 10, very important, that it must be complied, and it must be complied. And so that's what it means by don't do more. And so take from it means don't do less. Don't do away. Don't say, oh, I'll pick up half the toys, or I'll pick up tomorrow, or I don't think the parent means pick up the toys. I think he means to pick up the newspapers. It means that it's okay even if you don't pick it up. So that is what it means to take away from it. And so the word keep in this case is to guard, right? Is to guard. And then it is to keep, and how else should we say? It is to preserve, to protect. And why does God use this word to protect? Why don't he say, go and do? When he says go and do, he'll say go and do. When he says go and protect, he will say go and protect. What God means is that all these commandments needs to be guarded and protected so that your next generation will also receive exactly the same words. That is what it means to keep. It is so important that the word of God do not end with this generation, but the next generation and the generations to come will get to keep the same word, to pass it down exactly as they have received it. No more, no less. With the intensity, the importance given as is. Because in the commands of God, there are those that is very intense, very important, and there are those that are lesser. And hence, you know that God looks at all facets of life, and there are those that is mandatory, and there are those that is optional, and those that is voluntary, and those that is by the way. There are various sorts, and each of them has its judgments. Now, Moses gives them the reason why. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor. You know, it keeps coming out. Baal Peor, for the Lord your God has destroyed from among you all the men who followed Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today, every one of you. Now, first of all, remember the Hebrew words are very action-oriented. No, it's all about seeing, walking, tasting, touching, fighting, eating, hearing. And so it talks about the eyes, and the eyes is about seeing. Seeing is about perception, right? Perceive and experience. What God did at Baal Peor. Baal Peor is an incident in Numbers 25. The all famous story of Balaam and the donkey. Right after that, when he had to curse the children of Israel, he actually blessed them instead. But right at the end, he told the king how to tempt the Israelites, and that was where Baal Peor, the local deity, came into play, and a few thousand people died that day. And so God destroyed them. And the word destroy is, how should we say, is to utterly exterminate. I think that would be a good word here, right? It is to exterminate. And so on that day, in that time when some of the men went after the women and of Moab, and they cleaved and they clinged and they joined themselves and they yoked themselves with Baal of Peor, God was incensed. And there was no repentance given to these people. God executed judgment and immediately exterminated. So this is the narrative that came back, and to give them the gravity of the issue when they don't listen to God. From among all of you, all the men who followed, not just followed, the word follow is to walk after. These men followed after, did what the deity and the priests of the deity told them to do. They mingled with the women of the local environment, and they defiled themselves before God. And then those who held fast. Now this word held fast literally means to join to. Now, you may know this word from Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. When God says, and the man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife. And this is the word cleave. Join to the wife, to cling to the wife, to adhere, to stick close to God, right? And so this is the picture. It's a very action-oriented. And so these people chose not to follow after Baal of Peor. And then they actually stood by Jehovah, their God. And they are alive today because they weren't destroyed. Every one of them was still here. So surely I have taught you statutes and judgments just as the Lord my God commanded me. These statutes and judgments were not invented by Moses, although we may call it casually as a Mosaic law. They are really the laws of God, the commandments of God. So the word law is used very loosely and not in the Greek sense, in a very Hebrew sense. It's used very loosely, and it encompasses everything that God has instructed. Just as God instructed that you should act according to them in the land which you go to possess. Now, the idea here is you should act, you should do, and this is the word do, right? You should do in this same way, accordingly. Now, notice this word, keep. Let me use a different color. This word keep and this word act. This is to guard and to protect. This is to do. So when God says to do, he means to do. He doesn't mean to keep. When he means to keep, he doesn't mean to do. Now, doesn't mean that this word here doesn't encompass the action. It does. But in these verses that we're looking at, God chose very specific words that when you go into the land which you possess, you must follow the statutes and the judgments because it is meant to govern them. Verse 6, therefore be careful to observe them. Now this be careful to observe literally is two words, all right? And the two words is to keep and do. To keep and do. Now, you may be wondering, why can't we say keep and do? Why must they say careful to observe? Because it's an English expression. The translators want us as English readers to read it like an English word. But you do notice that the Hebrew words are all very well chosen. Each word has an action associated to it. So careful is not a concrete action, but to watch, to keep, to guard. Yes, that is that's careful, right? That's the meaning. To guard yourself. And to observe is not to look at something, but to actually do something with it. So be careful, guard yourself, and do the right thing. For this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. The reason why Moses is telling them that I am teaching you all this as the Lord my God commanded, to be careful to do them, is because it will reflect. It will reflect. People can see that this is your wisdom and understanding. Now, this would be an A and B. Wisdom and understanding are the nuance of the similar thing. They would have knowledge, they would have insight, they would have experience, they would have the wisdom to synthesize and to understand the situation. So wisdom and understanding are really two sides of the same coin. All right. And verse 6 says that all these people, to the sight, to the eyes, remember Hebrew is all very vivid, that all these people that is living there, that can see them coming, they can say, wow, the people who hear all that they are doing with regards to the limits which they work with in their lives, in their country, that they are possessing, they say, surely this great nation, the great Goy, right? The word Goy is also used for Israel. The great Goy is wise and understanding, and this will be the perception of other people. You see, God's people, in this case, Israel, is given the rules, the commandments, the statutes, the judgments of God, so that other people, when they see Israel, realizes that their ordinances, their laws is nothing compared to the laws of Israel. And that is where they say, wow, how did they get these rules? They came out of Egypt. This is not Egyptian behavior. And thereby they will be at awe with these people. And by what they see as a great nation, same, a nation or a Goy in this case, that's reference to Israel, that there is God. See, the way they behave will reflect God. And by God, it's Elohim. And Elohim is actually near them as in personal, as in a relationship. That's the word here. That the other nations do not have a relationship with God. The others have a relationship with the priests, right? That whatever priests say, they will have to do. But in this case, they can see that God is real. God is alive. God has a personal relationship with this nation as the Lord God is to us. Now, the word here is to us means this, that God is near to us, right? That God is near to us. And this is important, that Moses is saying for anything, any reason, for anything, we may call. The word call is to cry out, right? To cry out, to call for help, right? That's also the same word, that they can call upon him that every time they need something, they can call out to God, and God appears to be fighting for them and gives them these laws. And Israel is supposed to show the rest of the nations around, the peoples around them, that God is real. God is personal. God is near, right? That God is to us. God engages with Israel. And what great Goy is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments, because the judgments is fair. God's judgment is given to the nation of Israel. It's not to burden them. The rest of the nations have judgments that appeal to certain people, certain judges, or certain kings. And here, in all this law which I set before you this day, what about the law? This word here is Torah. Torah is instruction, direction. And so don't look at law as what we look at law today. Look at law as that God has set all these in place so that they can live by God's instructions, that they as a people of God should do that. Now, are they now called a people of God? And what does a people of God actually mean? And here in verse 9 onwards, Moses explained, right? Moses explains this. Only take heed for yourself. What do you mean, take heed for yourself? Keep, guard. And then we have another word, and diligently keep yourself, which is another word for guard, protect. It repeats itself with the same word, right? And this, both words have the same root, except that it has a different emphasis. In this case, it will be more beware. In the second case, is really to guard, but it comes from the same word with a different emphasis. Now, in English, one is heed, one is keep. And we can't see that in the English. Lest you forget. What do you mean by forget? Now, the word forget means to cease to care, right? Cease to care, to ignore. You notice it's not the English word to forget. It is a Hebrew word. To misplace the memory is what it means. The things your eyes have seen. Now, you notice all these are important. Why? Because that is the reason why you're doing it. You've seen it. You have seen it, and so you must do it. Be careful. Look at what God did to the previous generation. Look at what God did to Pharaoh. Look at what God did to those who yoked themselves with Baal of Peor. That's what it means, that your eyes have seen. And also look at how God has given you the land of the Amorite and the land of Bashan. Lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Now, the word depart is another simple action word. The word depart here is to literally turn aside. It means that you're walking down the path and you have turned aside from the path. Let me just draw you this picture. This is the path, and you're supposed to do the right thing. And this is the statutes and judgments, and you're walking on it. And the problem of depart means you go aside, and this is depart. Or turn aside. These are all very image-driven words. And teach them This is the same word. And teach them. What do you mean, teach them? Now, this is in the, it's not the same word as Moses said, I'm teaching you today. This word is really very much to make known. To make known, to declare, right? To make known to who? To your children and your grandchildren. Look at this. 1 generation, 2 generations. If you live long enough to see your grandchildren, you should teach them. So those of you who have grandchildren, well, that's also what this verse is saying. Teach them, make them known. Make them know. This is what God says. You should know about it too, right? Especially concerning the day you stood before the Lord your God in Horeb. And this would be the same incident at Sinai or Sinai. This would be in Exodus chapter 19. And this is a very important chapter. If you have time, go back and read Exodus chapter 19. When the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the, again, not the earth, the land, that they may teach their children. And so this word teach is the same word as Moses used. It is to learn, that comes as an intensive form, to teach. And notice, learning is in that generation, their children is the next generation to teach. They're not teaching that generation alone. They're teaching the next generation. Why? So that they can preserve God. And so the Torah, or the commandments, the law, the statutes, the judgments, they are all an heirloom, a treasure of the Israelites to pass down generation to generation without change. And that is why in the culture of the Israelites, the movement of this treasure from generation to generation is sacred. It is a charge given by God. So that God has given these words, God has shown his miracles, his power, his awesomeness, his greatness, his might, led them out of Egypt, now all the way here by the eastern shore of the Jordan, so that they will hear all this, learn all this, to teach it to the other generations. Now, in the next passage, it is a recollection of Exodus chapter 19. You all came near, stood at the foot of the mountain. Remember, this mountain is Sinai or Horeb. And what happened at that mountain is that mountain burned with fire in the midst of heaven. So from when you look up to the sky, there is fire, sparks. Fire is need not literally be forest fire, right? Lightning is also called fire. So there's lightning coming down, striking the top of the mountain with darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. Look at this. A, B, C. All of this represent the presence of God that's clouded, that is engulfed and wrapped up in darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. These are 3 words. That means a heavy fog, a heavy cloud, and it's so dark because you can't see inside. It's so thick. And in the ancient days, presence of God is always seen in darkness, in clouds, in thick darkness. And that's why the whole idea comes when God says, I am there, I'm showing you who I am, and the Lord spoke. See, God actually said something to you out of the midst of the fire. And then you heard the sound of the words. Now, the word sound is literally sound. Now, did they hear a sound? Yes, they did. But they saw no form. They didn't see the shape of God. That's the picture here, right? That's the picture. And you must understand the word sound and the word voice is the same word, kol. You only heard a sound. That is what it means. You saw, right? You saw. But what did they see? They saw nothing. They didn't see the form of God. Now, what do you mean by form? The idea of form is the idea of the shape of God. All right? It is very important for us to hear the shape of God. And so they didn't see the shape. They only saw what? Lightning. They saw darkness. They saw cloud, right? Thick darkness. And they saw sounds of words. So they could hear something. And that I would say, that would be Devarim, that God said something that they could hear, right? So perhaps they actually literally heard God saying something. And it really shocked them because no other gods in the land of Egypt and all the gods in all the other places, not even Baal Peor, nobody ever came to present. No gods have ever presented himself to the people. And so God declared to you his berit, his covenant. And the covenant is important because this is a formal promise. And he commanded you to perform. Verse 13, the word to perform is the word, a simple word that appears thousands of times, to do. See, when God calls them to do something, the command is to tell them to do something, and they're supposed to do it. So you notice the commandments of God is like a parent telling a child, pick up your toys. And so they are supposed to pick up their toys. That's what it means, right? And then he says, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And this is the first time we actually see the word 10 commandments. I think we should pay attention to this because it's very, very interesting, right? The word 10 is 10, right? This would be a number, and it would be 10 of, and the word commandments is actually Devarim, right? Devarim, words. Now, why did they translate words everywhere else and they change it to 10 commandments? I guess it's because the 10 commandments is more popular. And so if you were to translate here as the 10 words or the 10 Devarim, the 10 issues or the 10 statements, it has no punch, I guess, because all our modern day life, when we read the Bible in Exodus chapter 20, and we watch Charleston Heston in the 10 Commandments, it's always known as the 10 Commandments. And so the Hebrew meaning is actually 10 words, the 10 issues that God wants you to do, and he wrote them. Now, this idea of write is literally to inscribe or to engrave them on 2 tablets of stones. So it is cast in stone, and it's important for us to realize that it's in stone, and it is done in 2, right? 2 tablets of stone. Verse 14, and the Lord commanded me at that time to teach. Now, the word teach is the same as to learn which is intensive to teach, which he started in verse 1, right? In verse 1. And to teach what? To teach them the statutes and judgments. Remember statutes? The limits, the judgments, the consequences. There's a penalty. And that you might observe them. And the idea of observe here is very strange that they choose this word. And the idea is to do them, right? And when do you do them? In the land which you cross over to inherit, to possess. Cross over the Jordan. In the land. It's always about the land. And so you notice, when God commanded at Mount Sinai, it is all for them to be ready. When they go into the land, everything is set. So that when you step into the land, not only the land is there, but the rules to live by, because they are a nation under God, will be important. That they do not invent rules. God brought them out of Egypt not to live like Egyptians, not to live like the Canaanites, not to live like the Amorites, not to live like the people that they have conquered, but to live uniquely as children of Elohim, of Jehovah your God. And so that they have seen the true and living God at Mount Sinai, and they have received the 10 words. I call them 10 words here, or 10 Devarim. And they are to then do it when they enter into the land. Right now, they're too busy. What are they busy with? They're busy to conquer, to possess. But after they settle down, these will be God's rules, so that the nations around them will look at them and says, wow, you are all so different a people. Where did you get your laws? You must have God with you, because it is incredible in the laws that you have. So the laws are given to guard these people so that they are uniquely God's people. Now, I'm sorry we have ran out of time, and we will have to stop here, and we will continue on Monday. And with this, we will end today at verse 14.